on something extra. It was a little chilly tonight. You got here in the first severe frost. Will certainly be here tonight. So we shall see. Gracious, what a mob. A very likely mob, isn't it? Very, very interesting. Well, first of all, I certainly add my welcome to those that have already been purveyed to you, I'm sure. Knowing Dave and Ann, I'm sure that they welcomed you properly. Did you not? Yes. And I'm sure they've also covered a lot of the ground that in turn lets me get clear of those ground covering things, right? Thank you. So what does that leave for me? Not too much, does it? But I do have my own things that I'm sure that they did not cover because they rather fiendishly like to see what I will do with them. It's not quite the same each time. So, first of all, being the lazy type, I will sit down. Yes, I might consider that. That's a secret queue system that lets me have a cup of coffee if I would like one. Anyway, at least you should have some nice, bright, clear days to play around here, but I would not necessarily, unless you are from some very northern climate, I would not recommend swimming in the lake. It does get cooler very rapidly, and we've had some number of cool days, and some people have. And when you learn some of the later tricks, then you can do it, but not tonight or tomorrow. There are basics. One, I'm sure that Ann and Dave have covered the huge fear barrier that we all encounter in living within this sojourn. Have you not, Ann? Yes, yes. And the biggest problem is unloading that fear barrier because it's so heavily indoctrinated into our whole culture. And not only that, but the whole system in which we inhabit. So, without too much ado, I would get into the other parts of it. And that is that what in the world do we do here then, if we don't, other than learn how to get past this fear barrier? What we truly do, if we can, is to help you develop a different overview, which means another way of looking and perceiving that is not based on fancy, but some interesting types of facts. Now, the perception and understanding of that is, again, up to you. For a very basic example, we do not have, and I'm sure they've both told you this, but I say it again to reiterate it, we do not have any particular dogma. We don't even attempt to bring you any belief systems. We only teach you methods, and I'm not sure that we even teach you that. I think we offer them and you learn them. There's a difference between learning and teaching, if you can follow what I mean. Thank you, sir. This is my ritualistic coffee. I've been doing this for many years, and so it gives me an excuse to stop talking for a moment. You know? So, if you think of the pattern in which you are, that we do not inculcate any dogma, any belief systems, nor are we a part of any political or religious system, so that you will know that what I say now is hopefully very, very valid. You are on the beginning of what we call the freedom route. It means freedom of yourself, that you're released from so many different things, at least beginning to understand them. And once you understand or know something, you are free of it. You have the option of being it or not being it. That's what we're talking about when we say freedom. Most importantly, when we speak of freedom, no one, absolutely no one, this is a position that, again, we take, you don't have to even believe it. The whole business is you find out for yourself. Because unequivocally, no one, not I, no teacher, this is so important, no judge, no lawyer, no accountant, no one knows you. Did I miss? I missed a whole line of them. Knows you better than you know you. Now, you may not like parts of yourself, but you will begin to accept those parts of you as being, so what? So I pick my nose. What's wrong with that? You know, those kinds of things. Knowing you, therefore, no one can make decisions for you better than you. This is an inalterable rule. And begin to consider this as you move on from this point tonight. You can take they listen to all these other sources, but the ultimate decision on whatever it is within your life is yours to make. You are deluding yourself. It's an illusion if you think anyone can make such decisions for you. And that is a freedom if you think about it. It's also one of those hard ball tight stuff too, that if you pick up all the authority, you have the responsibility. That's that old cause and effect law, that if you create the causative action, your responsibility of picking up the effect. Things have their prices, but you then knowing this, don't you see, you can say, well, that's worth the price, I'll do it. So I lose an eye or a leg, so what? I had a good time, you know? It's a different part of you. Anyway, that's where you are. You're in the point of beginning a freedom route whereby you make the decisions for you. You can say, well, you can't do that. That's true to a degree, but you at least have choices all the way, a continual system of choices. You can make those choices relative to what your goals are, what you need to be or do. And those can be within the structure of the civilization in which you live. That's part of the rule, part of the game. So what you're here to do, I might add, is to find ways and means of totally knowing yourself. That's really what you came for. You may have thought up many, many other reasons, but after how many thousands of Gateway participants, we're pretty sure of that fact. You came to find out about you, never mind any other details. And certainly the tools that you will be learning will help you do that. There's no question about it. So, freedom route. We have many ways of achieving that, and Dave and Ann have probably given you some of the basics. Well, I'm going to give you another basic right now because it's so simplistic. You say, well, I don't know about that, but I will ritualistically stand up, get in the power position, and then I will create a percussive sound. And with that sound, time does not exist for you anymore. You are free of the boundaries of time. It means that no longer from this moment on do you have to worry when it's time to get up in the morning, when it's time to go to bed at night, when it's time to eat, when it's time to get into an exercise, when it's time to do anything. Someone will be there to do it for you. Even to go to the bathroom, someone will tell you when it's time. If your bladder won't tell you, someone will tell you, you see. And just to be sure that that drops into place, we will have Mr. Mulvey connect and collect the contraband.
Can we have your watches, please? We're having a tough time with this one.
I know. What
What was it we're looking for?
1927 Rolex.
27.
And here I didn't have a watch and decided that he could put it here.
If you have any alarm clocks or such in your room, please bring those
I
down.
bring that too.
Yes.
Well, in the room, but it's still working anyway.
Do we pick them up the same way? You
Well,
just pass the
depends
box
on whether
around?
we-
A very peculiar one, but simple. I am the person who has the cattle prod, if you know what that is. I got some frowns when I used to use the term pitchfork because I had the wrong type of implications.
But cattle prod is better?
Oh, much better.
Ay.
Every time you think you're well settled in your thinking and your position, I will come and mess it up for you. Do you understand what I mean by that? And this is something I, of course, enjoy doing. I'm certainly Machiavellian. Oh, that's one thing I forgot. Speaking, I get lost on these things. It's very, very important to me personally, that you understand that, how to put this properly, I am not the one to tell you what to do. When I said you are the authority for you, that includes me. I will and have already started to become a dear friend of yours, but I'm not your leader. Do you understand the difference? A dear friend, but not a leader. You know why? Because I like my freedoms, and one of the freedoms I like is I don't want the responsibility of being daddy. You don't understand what I mean? I've had that already, and I assure you. Do you know how to do it? What, are there any fathers here with daughters? How old are your daughters? Yes.
There are 15, 12, 12, and 10.
You're just getting into the hot area. How old are yours?
19.
Well, then you begin to know a little bit of what I'm talking about. It's that terrible moments that come up in being daddy when your daughter comes and she says, "But Daddy, I love him." And you know. But I hope you've had some fun in this daddy business to give you an idea how you can play this role. If you don't, he's got a great opportunity. Here comes this very macho, attempting to be young man to take your daughter out. And he wants to create this nice manly appearance to the father, you see. So he comes in and he, "Hello, Mr. Monroe, glad to meet you." And he shakes hands with a firm grip. But there's sweat all over his palm. And you, knowing this, the moment you look him square in the eye and say, "How are you, young fellow?" And he gets more, and you can feel the sweat coming out of his palm, because he knows that you know what he's thinking, don't you see? It works wonderfully, especially when you get real accomplished when you have 4 daughters. You know, the third and fourth one, they really suffered from it, don't you see? But again, back to that base. You are the authority for you, not I. I'm a helper to you. And certainly we are becoming very dear friends, but not a leader. It's much more fun for me the other way. Can you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'd rather be with you than in some other capacity. You will see what I mean later on. I will bring you a painting that I got that will illustrate what I mean. You saw that, didn't you, Mr. Mulder? Yes, all right. Anyway, I'm just delaying the board work because I don't like it any more than anybody else does. So is there a particular question at this point? Because there will be less and less questions needed simply because of the fact that you will make your own points of knowing, decisions, and so on. Or the answers, because I will gradually put a mirror up, and so will Dave and Ann, that says, you ask a question and say, go find out for yourself because you will know how to do it. And there's no limitation on that, incidentally. I have a daughter visiting me this weekend with her husband, and it was very interesting to see some of the reminiscences that came 35 years ago, David. And I'll get into that perhaps tomorrow night because it's an interesting validation of something that I didn't think anybody else truly remembered. Nice stuff. All right, I'll get to work. All right. Can you all see this pretty much? They always give me the opportunity to draw this all over again, just simply because they think I like to, and maybe I do. I'll take any one of these, and this is a nice colored one. And the whole purpose here is to, in turn, get things out of a belief pattern into a known pattern, because unknowns are fear producers. Knowns, the other side, that's the terrible thing. Let me show you about this. The terrible thing is that knowns eventually get boring. Did you know that? And so this is part of the problem. So we reach into unknowns to get a little excitement. Line drawn. Call the line an LD, which means a line of demarcation. And it separates one thing from another. Anybody knows that, don't they? And if that is here, what would be above the line?
There.
Right. Any monkey would know that, wouldn't it? In other words, let's get down to hard nose, the way it really is, and take all the glitz and glitter. That's a different overview, don't you see? See things as they really are, instead of the illusion patterns that have been built up as a result. All right. Take the next step and say that here is a framework of knowns. And what we know about, we don't fear. That's a strange thing. So we can call these knowns, because we may in turn, never fits.
You don't want it to.
No. Knowns, you don't fear. Now, everything you know, for example, about tomorrow, you don't fear. You coming here had a whole area of unknowns, and they had an anticipation pattern of excitement, but you were like a bunch of birds on a wire. And if somebody said, boo, you go, ah, because you really don't know what to expect. Now, as you go through this, you will know. And so that's the difference. So here are knowns, and then obviously what would be up here? Unks. Eh? Now, here's where things get into an odd kind of pattern. We'll do it this way. filtering through this line of demarcation are belief systems, which are partly unknown and partly known. And they would not be a belief system unless if it were totally known. And we get muchly involved in these belief systems, locked into them all the way across the spectrum, for the very, very simple reason is that they have something we're searching for. At the very least, it can be curiosity. At the very most, it can be God. You follow? The big part of these is that how much knowledge there are, knowns as it were, in there, and how much unknowns. Here we go. Your job for you is to look, and you've already started into this because Dave has run you down the route, have you not? Right. You are going systematically to go through every belief system that you have, and if you can, reduce it to a known, because then it is something of exquisite value. If it has unknowns in it, it has mystique, but perhaps may not be real. These will be working more and more as you go. Now let me take the same thing and put it into another category. I don't have to draw this, it's in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. Well, I can use that one, but that's not common. Here it is. Now we're trying to establish things that have perhaps something you can consider. All of these you consider. You go find out. You're getting the tools to do so. Think, and philosophers, physicists, and some of my best physicist friends are still playing with this notion that I have also, that there is an energy field called an M field. We use M because all the other letters in the alphabet have some other significance. That's why we use M. Here. And I have another friend who uses L. I used to use L, but it got stolen from us for some other purpose. It's now another part in the field of physics, an L field. Anyway, within that field, somehow, some way, perhaps a hologram popped into existence, and that's that pop is a relative term. 8 billion years may be only a pop if you are out of time, don't you see? This is the physical universe in which we now temporarily have a sojourn. Perhaps we're over here. Remember this? They used to sell a T-shirt with a part of the galaxy on it and a point that says, right here. Let's make it bigger, never mind. The galaxy is a little little microcosm over here somewhere. Now, the details of that and the nature of it has stimulated the curiosity of man ever since he came around and started to be. Over here, man does not know anything about this, but there's much to support the pattern that there is a negative universe, opposite polarization. There's much to support that in a number of different ways. And we, scientifically, at this point, I'm saying in the public arena of science, really don't accept that it is, but we speculate. Well, my friends, I got news for you. Where you're going and what you can play with sometime in the future, you can go explore that negative universe. I don't think it's very rewarding, but if you are tired of playing around here, you can lift off and go over there for a few seconds anyway, just to see what's going on. Remarkably similar. That's what we call the fun of it. is to go exploring. Hmm? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Inadvertently first. Anyway, but that gives you an idea of the super broad view. At this point, don't ask me about the hologram and how it got put together. That takes too long tonight, all right? But better still, I'll perhaps put the mirror up later on and say, you go find out, because then you will be suspiciously close to finding out yourself. All right? All right. Now, let me give you another pattern. Dave has run you through this phasing process, have you not? All right. Think of who you are, what you are, how you are, as being focused in that plus universe and phased into it by a phasing device called a physical body. This is a means through which you can perceive physical matter reality and also express yourself in it. Now, by doing it this way, you in turn are locked into that phase relationship. On the other hand, anything less than that full focused attention, and I don't think anybody's asleep yet, but that might get there. But inattention lets you drop your consciousness slightly out of phase. You don't do it, you just drift. And as you do that, you in turn are, let's say, 5% out of phase. There's a discriminator circuit at work, just as there is in all of our electromagnetic reception gears and transmitters. There's a discriminator circuit that separates all of this other part of the spectrum from living and being and thinking here. So when you came into existence here, you in turn, that discriminator circuit shut off all this other input and continues to do so. Now, the interesting part about this is that as you become more and more out of phase, that means, let's say, that you're 80% conscious here and 20% elsewhere. That's the difference. This means that somehow, some way, we begin to drift. If you look at it from this point of view, say here's that full phased-in focusing in time-space. If you move up just a little, that is in and of itself a controlled state, and that's about in about the middle of stage 2 sleep, and that's what your EEG suggests. If we were able to take one with you in the while you were doing this, but you can go do it yourself. Go into EEG laboratory when you go home, pop to 12 and find out for yourself. So simple, huh? Only about $1,200. So, but you're opening up a relative state with your consciousness. You are here, yet you are there. Now, there's another part to this that's very important. The uncontrolled part has gotten humankind into very deep trouble throughout the years. And you might at some point begin to observe this as an interested, detached observer. But somewhere along in here, that uncontrolled phase patterns is what we call psychotic states, because they're uncontrolled. So what happens when, and I will say this even though we may have a psychoanalyst in the mob here, I'm not sure, but they can come beat me on the head later, that current psychiatry and treatment of, quote, mental illness inevitably results in some type of drug blocking chemicals that will knock this phasing thing out and hold it all down here. That's basically what happens in the whole, instead of, and that is where the whole treatment system is moving more and more into using drugs to get rid of that phase shifting that part of one's self has done. Think about it. Then here we have a focus 12. What's the difference? Control. You'll be able to pop to 12, and I'm sure that David's told you so very easily. And it's not at all a type of thing where there's no lack of control. You control it. You're the boss. All right? Important. And moving on, 15, and here is right in 15, and right in here is what would normally be called stage 4, or we call it delta sleep. And to give you an illustration how basically profound that is, it goes back 12 years ago. We used to conduct gateways in conference centers, in hotels, and things like that, in a conference room. And where, instead of nice check units with real isolation, everyone was placed on a mat in a room about this size with headphones and lying side to side. And I can remember those days very vividly because you know what it looked like or what it felt like when people were in past focus 15. It was nothing so much as like walking through a morgue because there was no breathing that you could detect, absolute immobility, and this is the person doing that. And they're responding. Do you follow? This is the weird thing, is that they are responding even in that particular deep, deep state. Very similar to a coma, for example. So here, somewhere in there, is that phase relationship, out of phase called out of body. And it's only a matter of getting that thing. So in other words, obviously when you get clear over here, anesthesia puts it here, and anesthesia had a lesson to learn too. And this is before all of our time, but back in the 19th century or early 19th century, when a person needed a bullet taken out or a leg fixed or whatever, they dosed him up with liquor. And when he passed out, he's fine, now we can operate. So they do these things. Some very nice murder cases have developed through the century, as it were, where a person who had become unconscious from alcohol, from drinking, the killer simply took another half pint of whiskey and poured it down him, and he died because he's that close to death, don't you see? When you become unconscious from alcohol, the margin between that and physical death is very tight. So that's why they quit doing it. Too many people died on the operating table. So then came chloroform, and that opened the gap up just a little bit more. And then came ether, which opened it up quite a bit, except that there were some very disastrous things with ether, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, like explosions in the OR and this kind of stuff. So now we have another type of use that expands that gap. So when you are tethered out in that direction of death through anesthesia, there's a plenty of margin for error, as it were. So they can go roll you out, reel you out this way, and then be able to control it, because they don't have to drop it precisely at a given point, as they did in alcohol and could not do. So over here, then here, at what we call death, exit, pass. You see, this is passing out, you see. This is passing on. What's the difference? I don't know. Difference is that you're still phased in here in part. That's the difference. So with exit, this means that this system either willfully, and that's quite true, either willfully or without any will, you are no longer able to stay phased in this because your phasing mechanism doesn't work anymore. It's just that's absurdly simple. It simply doesn't work. So you have to take off and move on. The one of the chronic, you're your purpose, original purpose, was to go in this direction. And I don't want to get into that tonight. But what happens in so many cases is that upon that exit and moving out, you go there. To the belief system territories. So one of the things you will ultimately discover along the way is that, and very early, I tell you, and then you say, I believe you, and I say, well, don't believe me, go find out for yourself. One, you will discover that you are indeed more than your physical body. As you move down, I will give you the greatest piece of knowledge I can pass along. This knowledge, to me, doesn't even have to be a belief, but a consideration of yours. And that is that more than your physical body, of what you are, is utterly indestructible. There is nothing that can destroy that you. It can be stomped on, it can be blown out, it can be atomized, it can be rayed out of existence purportedly, but nothing happens. You are still there and you wave. Hi. Wonderful, wonderful piece of freedom to know those two things. You can lose a physical body, you still survive that. That you that survives is not eternal, but it's infinite and cannot be destroyed. What a wonderful piece of knowledge. That's one of the things I expect you in the year to come to get to a known stage. And that will change you, believe me, it will. Knowing you survive is one thing, but knowing that you're indestructible is something else. You can really play in a big sand violin, I assure you. So, all of this goes around to help get out of this particular box in which we are. This box of beliefs that we feel so safe, sound, and secure. But we, again, for one reason or another, curiosity or whatever, we want to get out of that box that constrains us. That box that is built up through human history, through current cultural context, through mommy and daddy's knee that you sat on and heard. All of these things in our contemporary rules and laws hold you within that box. This freedom route lets you stay within the box and without. Pretty cute. How to do this. But to give you a real significant idea of the difference between box and no box and how futile this means of communication is, Mr. Mulvey is going to show you a piece of thing that a picture is worth 1,000 words, a color picture is worth 10,000 words, a color, quote, talking picture or something is worth 100,000 words. I've been talking here for so many minutes, and in 3 minutes, this tells it all. And I would like to have you do it. Deliberate in jumping through the crack. That's all part of it. But more importantly, and that is that when you, in turn, make your own hole, no one does this, you do it. You do it. You may not even know that you've done it, first of all, until perhaps a year from now. And when you compare where you are and sit tonight, a year from now, then you'll know that you have reached out through the hole. Or the other part is, which I'm not sure of, because of your holes, not mine, whether you can ever seal them back up again. But I do know one thing, that what a magnificent opportunity you have by exploiting what's on the other side of the hole. And that's your program. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow night. Well, slight changes I see, huh? Yes. I'm going to start changing too. I couldn't wear a coat tonight. It just didn't feel right. But I have to have something to take off and throw away, so I will use this. Well, this is the very easy time for me because all of the things that I deal with now in tonight are knowns, and that's the nice thing. I have no real unknowns to play with, so I have to invent some perhaps. I don't know. We'll see. But I think probably the key thing to understand is, and I fumbled for the proper word, is how lucky, that's not the word, how fortunate, that doesn't quite do it either, but how something you are. And why do I say that? Because if you can think of humankind living now, 5 billion humans there, give or take 100 million, and of that 5 billion, there is a very, very, very thin layer who has the time and energy to think. That great mass of humankind symbolically struggles exhausted out of a straw pallet and gets up and goes to work at dawn, struggles in some kind of labor all day long, simply to exist, meaning to provide himself, herself, and family with food, warmth, and shelter. At night, having had some long, heavy, enervating day, they fall back into the straw pallet only to begin the same thing over the following day. That is typical of humankind one way or another. Vast, vast majority. Now here's a very, very thin layer, very, very thin layer, that has the time and energy to think. Now, you are a part of that layer. But to make matters worse, you are a very, very, very thin layer on top of that thin layer who are attempting to do something about it. There are many ways that you can possibly do something about that thinking process. You can think your life away and contemplate your life away, but to do something. One way is being here, of course, one of many ways. But that's where you are overtly different. There are other ways, and we'll get to those as we go along, but that begins to start you in a given direction. The other part that seems very significant is that being fortunate, and it's very difficult to express it in words because it's something that's far deeper than that. But I wonder if you can imagine, which you can't, how it was 32 years ago when I encountered this thing in my life for which I was totally unprepared. And being so unprepared for it is so difficult to convey the incredible loneliness related to it, the panic, the fear, and the terror connected with something that was an unknown at that time, and a tremendous unknown. You don't have that problem these days. There are thousands of ways you can go and dig out information or find people to talk to, if nothing else, who can nod their head at least and say, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. It was different in 1958. So very different. I think it's important to understand how that came about in the actual way that it did. And it's interesting how you begin to get veracity when you look and see what are the knowns. Well, here is the known. In 1956, my company had been operating for about 9 years in New York in the production of network radio programs. And during that era, and at one point, we were the leading producer in perhaps the United States of network radio programs, meaning in terms of volume. I won't say a word about the quality of it, but at least in volume. Gradually, I was in a dual role, being a vice president of a network and having someone else operate my company, which is quite interesting. But in 1956, it got to be the point where enough was enough, because I determined that my company, in getting into television, and we got started in it, we were doing something we had already been doing for the last 10 years. And what was that? How was that? Is all we were doing was adding a picture. We were using the same actors. We were using the same master of ceremonies. We were using the same theater sets, or just off Broadway. And the idea of that tremendous repetition all over again began to make me look in some other direction. And because it meant I had to do one of several things. And one of the key things is to lift my family and my entire operation and move it out to the West Coast in Los Angeles. Well, having at that time been commuting to Los Angeles weekly for about 3 years, again, enough was enough. I had gotten a good sample of what LA was like, and especially Hollywood. So we began to look for other alternatives. We got into the ownership of radio stations and let our program production go into what is called syndication. It's a way to recoup your losses or perhaps get additional profits. It's all the way you look at it. But as we did this, that too didn't seem quite enough, because that was somewhat in a storekeeping classification, and I never felt myself to be a storekeeper. So we started in, and where it came from, I have no idea, in doing some research in what it would be like and how one could learn during sleep. So we began to set up a small R&D program testing various methods of teaching people various data during sleep. One of the, of course, things that did emerge from that is that we did learn how to put people to sleep by the use of the very materials that we knew so well, which was sound. We were sound professionals, and we knew everything from composing our own music up and down the line. So here was what happened. We began to get these sound patterns that induced sleep in order to teach people about sleep. And I had a very interesting recent thing. My two daughters, who are now, I think one is 40 and the other is 42, remember very vividly as children as being subjects to that, and learning multiplication and learning Spanish words and things like that. In this, they were forced subjects, but they apparently enjoyed it. But I also was a major subject because I was intensely curious of whether this worked or it didn't work. So I must have gone through between 1956 and, say, early 1958, maybe 150 runs testing these various methods of employing sleep to learn. And my problem, of course, is that the sleep process did not work very well on me because I was too objective in it, analyzing it all the time. So that meant that I was, quote, fighting the sleep sounds that we were using. It is generally agreed by consensus these days that what created my first out-of-body experience was the summation of that subjecting myself to these sound patterns and resisting them, if you can think of that. And so this is where that beginning in 1958. And as you know, those you must certainly know, getting hot, excuse me. The first thing that, when this began to occur in my own life, was that total fear of what was happening to me. And being very, very conventional, strangely enough, and being of an engineering background, my natural inclination was to move into the fundamental scientific arena, and primarily medical, to say what is causing this. And as you know what happened, I went to my friendly internist physician, and he said, well, you're just overworking, that's all, and gave me some barbiturates to sleep better. Then when I came back and said they don't work, he began to get really worried because he saw I was that worried, and he was a very close friend. Pinning it down a little more tightly, he then took the trouble to give me a very thorough physical examination. And I thought brain tumor. This is that natural thing. And I was so sure, brain tumor. No, did not show any brain tumor. Then, after all these other types of complete testing, nothing came up. And I think he was disappointed, and so was I, frankly, because that would have answered the question very easily. You see, the unknown would have been answered. So there was only one alternative after exhausting all of those, and my doctor friend, Dick Gordon, says, Robert, he says, I have a son who's just set up residence in psychiatry. Why don't you go see him? And so having two psychiatrist friends socially, I thought, well, I'll try the son first. And he heard my story, and he says, yes, I think, a young man with a very authoritative air, says, yes, I think we could take care of you. We? Who's we? But I believe that we would have to have a minimum of 5 sessions a week. I said, 5 a week? All right. And I said, well, that would be pretty costly. He says, well, normally it would be $60 an hour, but because you're a friend of Dad's, it'll only be $40 an hour. And I said, well, how long will this take do you think, to get rid of this thing? And he says, oh, I would say 5 to 8 years ought to do it. Now, in my mental calculation, says, well, that's quite a bit to invest in anything. There's got to be a better way. So the next step was I got up the courage to talk to one of my psychiatrist friends, a man named Louis Wolberg, who had a psychiatric clinic in New York City. And he listened to me very carefully, and he nodded. He says, well, I think I can give you what might be the answer. And I said, well, what? He says, Bob, he says, I think you're consciously dreaming. And I said, well, what's that? He says, I don't know, I just made it up. He says, but I can certify one thing. He says, I know you too well. You're sane, so don't worry about your sanity. He says, I've known you too long. And I says, thank you, Louis. So that answered one question, at least, that someone who was in authority thought I was sane. So I felt a little better then. Meanwhile, this is taking place with about every other night or whatever, any time where I became relaxed. So the next step was to get into a meeting with a man named Foster Bradshaw, who was a psychologist in industrial practice in New York, who had former dean of men at the University of North Carolina. And I knew Brad quite well, and so I asked him, I described this, and he sat there and listened this way. Yes, you know, and as a result, he finally said, well, what's your problem? I says, well, I don't know what to do about it. I can't stop it and I can't start it. I don't even know what it is. He says, well, they do that over in India all the time. I've heard all about this over in India. He says, they know everything about this kind of stuff. And I says, well, how does that help me? And Brad says, well, there's only thing I can recommend. And I said, what? He says, well, I think you ought to go to India and study under a guru and live in an ashram. And just that's how you'll find out about this. I said, well, Brad, mentally thinking, what about my business? What about my mortgaged house? What about my wife and children and so on? And I said, well, what about these things? And Brad says, oh, well, that's not important. This is. And I mentally thought, and I'm thinking Brad and his very acquisitive wife who had 2 grand pianos in their living room. And I said, Brad, what would you do if you had encountered something like this? And he looked very pensive. He says, Robert, it's not my problem, it's your problem. So, being very stubborn and certainly not desirous of going to spend 10 years or something of my life in India, I then did what my way of doing is, and I set up a different kind of R&D program in my company that had been playing with this, and I never made the connection with this whole sleep learning program. We dropped that and got into finding out what this stuff was. And I picked up a research team that knew a little bit more about the whole search and find, not search and destroy, find type of stuff. And the first thing that came up was Bill called me and he said, Bob, he says, do you know there's an underground about this stuff? And I says, what kind of underground? He says, they got all sorts of names and labels for it. Now this is 1958, 59. He says, one of the things that they call it is parapsychology. And I says, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Parapsychology. And I said, well, is there anybody I can talk to in that? And he says, yeah, I'll find the name. And he said, but you ought to know that there is this underground, and they get all weird names, and they're all locked into various types of religions. And he says there is mixed up with all kinds of people who read cards, who do palm reading and have all sorts of weird voices coming out of them. He says, it's strange stuff. He even goes into spiritualist church, and they have people who read out all the time, just something like what you're talking about. I said, well, I don't know about that. So Bill called back and came up with the name of a man named J.B. Rhine, who at that time was the leading professional light in parapsychology. I'm sure some of you have certainly heard of him. And his great fame at that time was using a special type of card system to have subjects guess cards to see percentiles. And it was all a matter of statistics and numbers, if they got this many right out of this many and so on. And that was his, I didn't know at the time I met him that's what he did, but that was all I knew of. He's a J.B. Ryan, he was at Duke University. So owning a radio station in Durham made it relatively easy to set up a date to meet him on Saturday morning, and so I conducted business on Friday night. That's a relative term. And I met him on Saturday morning, and a young graduate student working for him let me in the door of this large empty building, no people there, and led me out along the hall to his office, and I got out, and here was J.B. Ryan, a man of about medium height, very intense blue eyes, and he was in his middle 50s, I would say, at that time. He was very gracious, and now this, I had great expectations because this was the leader of the scientific type of this field that I respected so much. So he asked what I needed, and I told him of my problem, and he says, "That's very interesting." He says, "I've heard of it." I look, "Oh, great." He says, "But it's not my department." And I says, "Well, can you tell me anything about it?" He says, "No, I've only heard of it. It's not my department. I play cards. I deal in cards." And I says, "Cards," remembering the poker game I just had that last night. And I said, "What kind of cards?" And he told me. And he invited me to do one of his card games and guess cards and such. And I said, "Doctor, that's not my department." Not in the way that you think, anyway. And I explained to him, and he laughed heartily sometimes at my phenomenal success in poker. That's another story. So, as a result, I thanked him very much and went out, and I felt very, very disappointed because this was supposedly a scientific authority, and I was wedded to the scientific principle, and he had no answer for me. And I still didn't want to go over to India. So as this graduate student let me out the door, he opened and unlocked this outer door and let me out. And as I was going out, he said, "Mr. Monroe." And I said, "What?" He says, "Don't worry about it." And I says, "What do you mean, don't worry about it?" He says, "I do it too." And then he slammed the door. It was the first person that I met anywhere at that time who admitted to the fact that they did it too. But he slammed the door. Next on the line, there were some minor ones, but the next on the line was that Bill called me and said that he had a real live one, a man who had done this literally hundreds, if not thousands of times, and that if I wanted to find out that he was also very careful, that he wrote down all of his activities very carefully, or he said, or at least somebody did. So I like to have him go and meet this man and talk to him. And I said, "By all means, go indeed, fast." So he called back about 2 days later, and he says, "Bob," he says, "I made a terrible mistake. He's not a live one, he's a dead one." That not being alive meant that he had indeed done all of these strange things that were certainly akin to it. And Bill asked me, "What do I do?" He says, "The walls here are covered with readings all over, stacks and stacks of them. They have them cataloged by number, and that's about all." And I said, "Well, see if you can find something, and then come on back." And he came back with 4 or 5 very interesting and possibly significant Edgar Cayce readings. And as you well know, through the years, the Cayce Foundation has become very systematized in their use of the Cayce material and has become a very, very valuable library. But at that time, it was stacks and stacks of just papers. And so the next one online was, I had an office on Madison Avenue at that time, and Bill called again and says, this one's easy for you. And I says, what? He says, well, there's one only 5 blocks from your office in Manhattan. I says, well, that sounds pretty convenient. He says, yes, and I'll give her your name, I'll give her name, and you can call her and make your own date. And I said, fine. So I called a woman and made an appointment with her. Her name was Eileen Garrett. Have you ever heard of Eileen Garrett? And at that time, here's was a field I knew nothing about, but she was perhaps one of the world's leading psychics of the era, and tremendously respected in the field. Totally new and strange field to me. So, to make it very short, I did go and took and walked, think of it, walked the 5 blocks instead of taking an airplane or whatever, and went up on West 57th Street, and sure enough, there, after having made the appointment, went in, and there was an office that had a name on it called, what was it, some type of foundation. And I went in, and there's this secretary, and the secretary says, oh yes, you're expected to sit down. So I sat down, and about 3 minutes later, the buzzer rang and said, you can go in now. So I went in. There was Eileen Garrett. She was a woman at that time, I suspect maybe in her late 50s, I would say, a very tall woman, blonde, large woman, but very, very warm and friendly. And she greeted me and sat down, and she asked me what she could do for me. And I told her, and she looked so very casually, says, well, what's your problem? And I said, well, I'm trying to find out some information about it so that I know I can stop it and I can start it, at least to get it stopped. And she says, I said, do you know anything about it? And she says with this great, nice, casual, oh yes, I use it every day. I says, what? She says, yes, I've been using it since I was 5 years old. I said, well, look, this is great. Tell me about it. She says, well, I said, how do you use it? She says, well, for example, I use it in my office, and I just got through using it. When you were sitting outside, I got out of my body, went through the wall, took a good look at you to see whether I really wanted to see you or not. And I looked and I says, that's pretty good. I could see some ways on that one. And then the next thing that came about was that she asked me if I had any other ideas, and I said, well, all I want to know is if it is of practical use and to learn to control it. She says, well, there's one way that I use it every day without fail. Every day, absolutely. And I says, how is that? This looks to be for some goodness. I said, wait, great. She said, well, just before I leave my apartment to come to the office, the very last thing I do before opening the door to leave is I pop out of my body, get behind myself to see if my slip is showing. I thought, that's pretty good. There are some practical uses to this thing. And I said, well, how do you start it and how do you stop it? That's what I need. She says, Mr. Monroe, I just think it and it starts. And I said, well, how do you stop it? She says, I think it and it stops. I says, well, how do you think it and how do you start it and how do you stop it? She says, well, I really don't know. I've been doing it for so long, I just think a certain way. I says, can you tell me how that thinking is? She says, I've never thought about thinking about how I do it. She says, I'll let you know. And she put me in touch with the man who was in charge of her research at that time, Carlos Osis. And we had a number of very warm and friendly meetings, and a year later, we were putting together various constructs called ghost traps to trap people who were in there out of body and you wanted to meet them. Another story to that, too. But that began a series of trying to find out things, and I, of course, was the chief subject. And we slowly began to set up systems where at least when this went uncontrolled, I could begin to do something about it, and it was very, very much of a painful process. But I assure you, I have to let you know this one thing, that it was not until a year after this had been, I've been going through this for a full year, did I lose any fear about it, A, and secondly, did I say this is a known, it is not an unknown? In other words, it was a reality instead of an hallucination or some type of daydreaming or whatever, that it was real. And it was not any tremendous breakthrough that did that. It was a systematic accumulation of one piece of data after another until it began to pile up until my, quote, left brain, that my analytical self could not help but accept the fact of the reality of it because here's a mass of data. I couldn't do anything else. The moment that the fear moved away, I got curious. And I fly all over the landscape or all over the universe. But in order to make it effective, you got to bring that left brain analytical self slowly into the picture. And I assure you, I can speak from very, very strong experience. Nothing will intrigue your analytical self so much as it begins to collect data on this. The first thing, your left brain or this analytical self says, I don't believe in it. And the second thing, it begins to say, what's going on here? And then it's gone. The moment it locks that and says, what's going on, that means that that intellectual curiosity hooks into it and begins to gather beautiful type of data that satisfies that party of you. That's the one way that you will progress through this and develop, is by bringing that part of you. Don't throw it away. Use it. And think of the evolution through there. What did occur was, slowly but surely, we began, by focusing upon me as the chief subject, there's all this data build-up, verifications and things like that. And then we began to look into other ways and means, and we did begin to use the sound patterns to, in turn, help me control these early states. And out of that began a whole series of getting other test subjects. And I did leave my daughters out of it after that. I felt too uncomfortable, and so did my then wife, I might add. So then, moving up through the years, I found historically that coming down to my business operation, now we had then 2 radio stations in North Carolina, that I found that the weather in midwinter was much better in North Carolina and Virginia than it was in New York. And when you would come out of a savagely cold New York into shirt-sleeve weather in North Carolina, made me look for that possibility. Why am I living up there when all my business is down here? So I drew a line across the area of my childhood, and it ran through Richmond, Virginia. And 2 weeks after drawing that particular line, a broker called. He says, Mr. Monroe, I have a station for sale in Richmond, Virginia. And I says, So that's how we got and cranked up and closed up shop, sold our house and our properties, and I brought my entire business down to Richmond, Virginia. And that's how we got to Virginia. And that was in 1962. So I have the dubious thing, I thought of myself as a New Yorker prior to then, but now I think I'm a Virginian simply because I have lived in Virginia more than I did in New York. So does that give you somewhat of a broad-nosed background or something? Does anybody have any questions now? But it gives you the point of comparison is all. Look, what could be and what isn't. Yes, sir?
When you were doing the early studies on dream states and learning, the relationship between learning and dream, would you call what you were attempting to do subliminal programming?
Would I call? I've called it subliminal programming. No, it was worse than that. We were flat out attempting to program dreams during the REM sleep state.
rather than program the left brain.
No, this was all non-conscious learning modes. Most of it was simply rote learning of data. As I said, my daughters still remember the things of going to sleep, listening to the numbers, and then waking up. And you know what I was teaching them? Were multiplication tables, not the the normal ones up to 12, but the 13 to 24 multiplication tables. These little 5 and 7-year-olds. Anyway, they still remember it as they are now.
I have another question.
Yes.
It has to do with, I recall in reading from your first book where you talked about your early experiences of being out of the body and finding yourself on the ceiling of your bedroom looking down.
Yes. Mm.
Now, given that in that dimension, our energy body is not held in by the physical shapes that we build here, what do you think it was that kept you from going through the structure?
Oh, you're asking what kept me from going through the structure.
I have my own opinion about that.
Well, I can give you my own opinion too. It's a belief system.
Right, exactly.
You can't, because your physical body won't go through that wall or that ceiling, you don't think this other part of you will go through it. And as long as you don't think it, it won't. It's
But
that
at the
simple.
same time, you had no idea what was happening.
No, I had no idea. That's right. So I related it to as a physical event.
Right.
That's the best I can say.
Well, that was, I understand from your second book that that first initial out-of-body was predestined because of the circumstances, and your last book, obviously, that had to happen at that time.
There's certain controversy about that predestined part of this happening. I'm still not absolutely sure there was nothing more than a monkey falling out of a tree trying to swim or swing from one limb to another and missing the limb and falling out. That's about as I would like to make it that simple. Maybe it isn't that simple, but I would like to think it would be that the whole thing's an accident, you see. It's easier to think that way, I assure you, than anything beyond it. So that type of beginning is true. Now let's play with other kinds of numbers. I can see you are getting into a speculative mode, so fine, we'll speculate a little bit. Little nice, neat challenges. Challenge number 1. We have roughly, you are the thin layer on top of the thin layer on top of the thin layer. All right. Let me tell you that statistically, and I'm challenging you this because in the years to come, you will find out for yourself, or you'll be so curious that you'll have to find out for yourself, that if you talk among 5 billion humans alive, and you work with a statistic there, 1 in a million has talents and abilities and capability in a form that we would not even consider human, albeit it is in human form. That would make about 5,000 living beings, would it not, existing on this earth among ordinary humans, right? Now, there is a lot to support the reality of the existence of those 5 billion superhuman beings. You are developing ways and means that eventually you may encounter one, because remember that capability is known by these 5,000, and they are very quiet about it. Now, I have not much information. I've only have a lot of suspicions and only 1 or 2 facts. But one of the things I know is that they're not public. In other words, they are not in leadership roles and have not been through human millennia. They've been, let's call it, the quiet ones. Now I say, if you like curiosity, try to think, if you can, what those 5,000 with that type of capability, what could they possibly be doing?
Right.
What could they possibly have as a reason for hanging around here? You understand? I've, of course, who can tell? That's a good one. Monkey business, my friend says here, which is quite true. But these are types of reality that perhaps you have not considered. But statistically, that's some of my super statistical friends have brought that out as a working number, 5,000. That justifies to a great extent the rationale that I put, having met just one of these on a willful call, as it were, not knowing, with this very great jocular way, having asked to meet such a being, and I was escorted to meet such a being, and this human, very human man in his 40s or something like that, sitting there in a chair and so on, in a normal environment, and he's sort of laughing most of the time because he can read everything I'm thinking, you see. And so I got very, very little information out of him, except for the fact that he was enjoying it far more than I. And I know he was hearing me is the loose way to say it, calculating, I'll get back and meet him again sometime. But there was no possible way, and he was laughing because he knew there was no possible way, that I could find out where he really was physically on this earth. It was an apartment, or it could have been a room in a house. I could perceive outside, and there are other buildings, so it was a city. But what city? This is the point, because it was one of those click-ins and click-out type of things, so I had no, oh, that's Paris, I can see the Eiffel Tower type of stuff. It wasn't that kind of approach and departure. And he was very, very amused at my calculating, and say, well, I'll challenge it. And so he said, as I was about to leave, my escort saying it's time to leave, he says, well, I can give you one thing that you might like to play with. And I said, what? He says, I could have. He says, my name is Robert too. I said, all right. But it's that type of thing that you encounter. It leads. What I think I'm really going all the way around in a long, obtuse way is to say it becomes tremendous fun once you lose the fear. This exploration that you're beginning, not only externally, but of yourself, becomes very, very intriguing once you get past the fear. The freedom of it is so very, very profound. That reminds me, I better do the gateway routes, shouldn't I? Yes. Bang. Ready? You ready?
Yes.
Tilt and pan. Over here? Here.
Yes.
I'm on the right track?
Correct. Next one.
My gracious, you've got it real easy. The next level of gateway. And it has each of these things, of course, has a challenge in it. What's the challenge? Well, in this case, again, knowing who you are, why you are, and to another way, where you are. Let's take the first one. We call it the path to adulthood. We have our fun labels, and you put your own labels, but this is ours. We defined adulthood is also an impossible goal. These are all impossible goals, but this is what you're shooting for. By our definition, one who is a total adult is one who is totally in abeyance with the cause and effect law in terms of taking total authority for oneself and accepting all the responsibility for those authoritative actions. If you can think of it this way, that when you entered this life sojourn, and I'll put it that way because I don't want to dilute it in another way, when you did this, you had this discriminator circuit that shut off all of anything else that you might have brought with you. And that's the only way that you could become human, is to create a human mind consciousness basically clean of these other things. Call it a state of innocence is the best way to describe it, where a clean slate, something that is formed instead of something that's already formed. That's the purpose, is to create something new through learning, through experience. Now, as you did this, you immediately were creating a lot of effects by your causative actions. And Mommy and Daddy took care of these things. And I don't have to go into exquisite details, and those of you who are parents know full well what I'm talking about. But a little baby has two slaves that service it all the time. That's what a baby is. And as you begin to grow up, as we did, we were hopefully taught more and more to pick up the effects of our causes. And that meant toilet training, for one, for example. That was the starting point. And no matter how much we might have resented it, that was the law of our civilization, is that you had to learn to go in certain places instead of always in your pants or in the diaper. Cause and effect, you see, and Mommy and Daddy were very patient with you on this. Slowly you began to take on more and more little bits of authoritative roles as Mommy and Daddy guided you into this purported picking up authority and taking the responsibility for it. And this is why, of course, beyond Mommy and Daddy, there is this educational system set up basically for that purpose, to begin to connect these patterns together. The little simple one, as a little tot growing up, Mommy said, don't touch stove, stove is hot, burn fingers. And we always begin to challenge authority even then. So in your mind you said, oh, Mommy doesn't know what she's talking about, so you touch the stove, burn your fingers. And that's one way to learn. But that's the hard way, don't you see? And life gets very short sometimes when you do it the hard way. So we have systems that in turn teach you, and our educational systems are purportedly learning the easy way instead of the hard way. It's even animals teach their young, and then up to a certain level, and then they kick the birdling out of the nest, or the lioness cuffs her cubs and says, get away, it's time to go on your own. This is where we take a lot longer than the animal to mature, because we have much more types of cause and effect, authority, responsibility connections to make. We never really achieve it, because what happens along here as we take this path to adulthood, we have this early growth pattern, and then we level off. This is somewhere past teenagerism or something like this. And then we level off, and we keep moving in this semi-state of innocence, because other authoritative things begin to control you. The culture does, all the things that you know of, and I don't have to go through them, that do begin to teach you, and also in that teaching control you. So we begin to get lazy, and we just say, well, we accept all the laws and rules and so on and so on, and we let somebody else take the authority, some other system or whatever take the authority, and also we lay off all the responsibility. So we have means of doing both. So we level off. Item. The tools you are beginning to learn have the capability for you to change that. The ability to put an exponential growth pattern into adulthood from where you are right now. No one can do it for you, but the application of these tools as you begin to effect these changes can indeed create that. That doesn't mean, and by any sense, that you will reach total adulthood. It's very, very rare, but the potential is there. That's the change. All right? Now we have what we call, not a path, but a road to maturity. How in the world would we define maturity? Naturally, it would not be the plain old ordinary way, would it? We wouldn't be that gauche. So, how do we define maturity? We define it by the number of illusions that you have released. Not disillusions that have been dragged from you and stomped on, but the ones that you have looked at and released. Again, the pattern of growth takes place the same way on this impossible ideal of all illusions having been divested. Normally the same thing. There's a rapid growth of release of illusions, and then the same pattern that engenders this level at this plateau does the same thing on the point of maturity. We gather more illusions than we can let go of. It's that simple. You got them, and you're shoveling them out here, and they're coming in on top of you over here. It's a never-ending process. Illusions. The same system that you're working on will help you if you let it. You don't have, that's again the thing. No one will do this for you. You can do it. Will begin to let you deliberately release illusions. And just for the fun of it, and not for much else, I'll give you a little challenge that probably will not, you'll have one idea when you become a graduate here. In a year from now, you'll have an entirely different idea of what is your ultimate illusion. Now, what do I mean by your own ultimate illusion? I mean the one that you just can't conceive of as being an illusion. That it's just beyond your capability to think of it as an illusion. Some of them are quite easy. One sign of maturity, of course, that we don't like it, but we then begin to like it once we understand what is an illusion that you release once you recognize what it is, but you still can use it, and that's the thing that's so important. Releasing an illusion lets you recognize and know it's an illusion, but that doesn't mean you can't wallow in it and enjoy it, don't you see? But you can snap and say, well, that's enough, I got something else to do. You understand? That's the beauty of it. You can maximize the illusion, if you wish, then, because you know that you're not locked into it. What is a very simple illusion? I love to use this one because we all fall for it, and it's a very common one. And you know what it is? Romance. And all of us can't help in our lifetime but fall for the idea of candlelights and soft music and however you want to put it, and dancing in a shadowy place, and all these things, walking along a beach under moonlit, you know, all of it. We love it. It's great stuff. We just love it. Would you believe that knowing it's an illusion, you can maximize it? Just think about it for a bit. Let the left brain get in the act. Says, boy, do I really want to play this illusion. Wham! Great stuff. So think about what is your ultimate illusion. What is yours? Not mine, but yours. And the one that, as I say, is near impossible. I didn't say impossible, but near impossible for you to accept as unreal. So, moving down, next, we have what we call the highway to wisdom. Now, highway to wisdom. What in the world would we call wisdom around here? How would you measure wisdom? We measure wisdom on the basis of what one does, thinks, and becomes, and acts to fill the vacuum caused by the release of illusions. Do you put in more illusions? What does one do? Wisdom does not necessarily have to be the product of experience. It can be the product of something else.
Can you say that again?
Wisdom does not necessarily have to be totally the product of experience. It can be the product of something else. And that's the challenge. Wisdom. What do you put into your, and we're not talking about the physical life is only the action thereof. We're talking about what in turn you do within your whole mind consciousness, which is the point. So then we got another point here, which we say going interstate, and this is the cute one. The original pattern of this, the original, say, design, whatever word you'd like to call that destined stuff, would say that having accumulated all this, and you'll notice that this would give you escape velocity to leave and, quote, go home, or do what you intended to do once you completed this course of learning. And this, in turn, was the escape velocity that you would generate by the compendium, the averaging of these other three curves. Unfortunately, something happens on the way to the store that prevents that. And so therefore, this this plateau reflects here. And what do you think happens?
Fear?
No. We'll talk about it on another night. But what it is very simply that we become junkies to the human experience. We become addicted to being human. So we got to come back and get just a little bit more of it, don't you see? And that's what we keep doing instead of taking off and going home. All right? So, have I forgotten anything, Mr. Molly? I don't think so. Tonight, you are going to have an exercise, and that's been the nice excuse for all of this. You're going to have an exercise that we call liftoff. Now, liftoff is in and of itself, and it uses in its hemisync sound patterns a waveform similar to the ones that we were using all the way back in 1957 and 58. The design of it is so that hopefully, just hopefully, without anything more than that you might get the feel of what happened to me all the way back in 1958, the feel of it, the sense of floating. Because on that faithful Friday night, I was waiting for these vibrations to end, and that I'd gotten accustomed to and found out that they were not going to kill me. But they took about 5 minutes to surge and go along, and then they faded out. And having experienced that 25 or 30 times and found out that they were just an annoyance, On this particular Friday night, I was waiting for them to fade away so that I could go to sleep, that I could get up on Saturday morning and go and fly sailplanes and gliders, because that was my great hobby at that time. And this particular Friday night, a cold front was coming through, and that meant strong northwest winds to create a ridge lift at Wurtsboro in New York. It also meant, because of the strong sun action, a lot of thermal activity, and there would be a lot of lift to soar on. So as I was lying there waiting for this vibration to stop, I was also thinking how nice it was going to be tomorrow to soar on these nice, huge thermals that would lift me up and up and up. And then